The cold evening air seeped through the cracks in the tiny apartment, wrapping around Emma like an invisible thread of worry. She sat beside her father's bed, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. His skin, once full of warmth, had turned pale, his features drawn and weary. The scent of medicine and faint traces of antiseptic filled the room, clinging to the air like an unwanted presence. Bills were stacked high on the rickety wooden table, unopened and ignored, each envelope a silent threat. Emma clutched her only doll, her small fingers tracing the delicate porcelain face worn smooth from years of comfort. It was the last gift her mother had given her before she passed, a keepsake of love frozen in time. The doll's once bright blue dress was now faded, its golden curls tangled, but to Emma, it was perfect. It was all she had left of a world that had once felt safe. From the other side of the room, a loud knock rattled the thin door. Emma flinched. Her father stirred but didn't wake. She rose quickly, pressing her ear against the wood, heart pounding. A gruff voice spoke. "Daniel, I know you're in there. Rent was due last week. You can't keep avoiding me." The landlord. Emma squeezed the doll tighter, glancing back at her father. He barely had the strength to sit up, let alone work. They had no money. The voice outside sighed in frustration. "If you don't have it by Friday, I'll have no choice but to evict you." Footsteps faded down the hallway, leaving behind a silence that pressed against Emma's chest. She turned, swallowing the lump in her throat. Her father lay still, his breath shallow. Emma was only 10, but she knew what desperation looked like. She saw it in her father's eyes when he thought she wasn't watching, in the way he turned away from her when his coughing fits racked his body. She knew he was trying to protect her from the truth, but she wasn't a child who believed things would magically fix themselves. Her gaze fell to the doll in her hands. Her only treasure. The one thing in the world she didn't want to give up. But what good was a doll when her father needed medicine? The decision settled in her chest like a heavy stone. She carefully placed a blanket over her father and tiptoed to the door, slipping on her worn shoes. The city streets stretched out before her, alive with neon lights and the hum of evening traffic. She kept her arms wrapped around the doll as she walked, her breath fogging up in the cold. The first shop she entered was small, crammed with shelves of old trinkets and antiques. A tired-looking man sat behind the counter, barely glancing up as the bell chimed. Emma hesitated before stepping forward, standing on tiptoe to place the doll on the counter. "How much can I get for this?" Her voice was small but steady. The man blinked, finally looking at her. His gaze shifted to the doll, then back to her face. He scoffed. "That thing? Maybe a couple of dollars. It's old and scratched up." Emma's chest tightened. "But it's special." "Not to me," he said, already turning away. "Try somewhere else." She gathered the doll quickly, cradling it as if he had struck it. Tears burned the edges of her eyes, but she held them back. She wouldn't cry. Not yet. The second shop turned her away before she could even speak. The third one told her they didn't buy toys. With every rejection, the weight in her stomach grew heavier. She stood on the sidewalk, her fingers stiff from the cold, her hope fading with every passing moment. Was this all for nothing? Had she truly thought someone would care enough to buy a worn-out doll from a little girl? Then, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. It was different from the others. Silent, powerful, expensive. The door opened, and a tall man in a tailored coat stepped out. His presence was commanding, his gaze sharp. People on the street glanced at him, some recognizing his face. He barely noticed. His eyes, piercing and unreadable, landed on Emma. She instinctively held the doll closer, unsure why a man like that would even glance her way. "You look lost," he said, his voice smooth yet distant. Emma hesitated. He wasn't like the shopkeepers who dismissed her, nor did he carry the hurried indifference of the city crowd. There was something else. Curiosity, maybe? "I need to sell my doll," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "My dad is sick. He needs medicine." The man's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. He stepped closer, inspecting the doll with a careful gaze. He reached out, pausing just before touching it, as if unsure whether he should. Finally, he spoke. "How much?" Emma's heart pounded. She had no idea what price to name. Would he laugh at her like the others? She swallowed hard. "Enough to help my dad." For a long moment, the man said nothing. Then, he pulled out his wallet and handed her an amount far greater than she had expected. More than she could ever dream of. Her eyes widened. "This is too much." He shook his head. "It's the right amount." Emma hesitated, then, with a deep breath, placed the doll in his hands. A sharp pain twisted in her chest as she let go. "Thank you," she whispered. The man didn't reply immediately. He was staring at the doll, his expression unreadable, almost distant, as if seeing something beyond what was in front of him. Emma didn't wait to question it. She clutched the money tightly and ran, her heart pounding with a mixture of relief and sorrow. As she disappeared into the night, Alexander Carter stood motionless, his fingers brushing over the worn porcelain face. He had seen this doll before. Years ago. And the memory of the woman who had once owned it came rushing back, unbidden and sharp, like a ghost from the past. The weight of the porcelain doll sat heavier in Alexander Carter's hands than it should have. He turned it over carefully, studying its features under the dim glow of his car's interior light. The tiny painted lips, the faint crack along its delicate cheek, the faded blue dress, every detail pulled him deeper into a memory he had buried long ago. His fingers brushed the tiny locket sewn into the doll's dress, a detail so small it would be easy to miss. He exhaled sharply. It was real. It wasn't just his imagination playing tricks on him. This doll had belonged to her. The past hit him like a punch to the gut. He saw her smile, heard the soft melody she used to hum, felt the warmth of her hand in his. A woman he had lost. A name he had forced himself to forget in the endless pursuit of power, success, and an empire that now felt meaningless. His driver glanced at him through the rear-view mirror. "Sir, are we heading to the penthouse?" Alexander didn't respond immediately. His mind was still tangled in the past, in the realization that the little girl from earlier wasn't just some desperate child selling a toy. She was connected to something, to someone who had once been everything to him. "No," he said at last, his voice quiet but firm. "Take me to the address," she ran to. The car pulled away from the curb, its powerful engine humming softly against the quiet streets. Alexander tapped his fingers against the doll's porcelain arm, feeling the weight of 1,000 unspoken regrets. Emma burst through the apartment door, breathless, cheeks flushed from the cold. She clutched the money tightly, her heart pounding. Her father stirred at the sound of her hurried steps, blinking up at her with weary confusion. "Emma." His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. She dropped to her knees beside the bed, her small hands wrapping around his frail fingers. "Papa, I got the money. We can get your medicine now." Daniel Parker's tired eyes widened slightly. "Emma, where did you?" "I sold my doll," she admitted, forcing a small, wavering smile. It was enough. A flicker of something passed over his face. Pain, guilt, helplessness. He had promised himself that no matter how bad things got, he wouldn't let his daughter sacrifice what little she had left. And yet, here she was, giving up the one thing she had treasured the most, all for him. His throat tightened. "You shouldn't have." "I had to." Her voice was quiet but unshakable. "You're more important." His vision blurred with unshed tears, but he didn't argue. He was too weak to fight her on this, too overwhelmed by the sheer depth of love in her small but determined heart. Before he could say another word, there was a knock at the door. Emma stiffened. For a moment, fear gripped her. Was the landlord back already? Had she been too late? She hesitated before opening it, expecting to see the tired, impatient face of a man demanding money. Instead, she looked up into the piercing gaze of the billionaire from earlier. Emma's breath caught. "Mr." Alexander Carter stood in the dimly lit hallway, the doll still cradled in his hands, his expression unreadable. He took in the sight of the tiny, run-down apartment, the peeling wallpaper, the single flickering light bulb that barely illuminated the room. But his gaze softened when it landed on her, this girl who had unknowingly dropped a thread back into his tangled past. Can I come in? His voice was calm, quiet, not demanding, not forceful. Emma hesitated but nodded. She stepped aside, and Alexander entered, his tall frame making the small space feel even smaller. His eyes flickered toward the bed where Daniel lay, his frail form barely a shadow of the man he used to be. The moment Daniel's gaze met Alexander's, something unspoken passed between them. A flicker of recognition, buried deep in time, too faint for Emma to notice. "You're the one who bought the doll," Daniel murmured, his voice weak but laced with something else, something cautious. Alexander nodded, his grip on the doll tightening. "I had to." Emma shifted uncomfortably, sensing something she didn't understand. "Did you come to return it?" Her voice was small, uncertain. Alexander's gaze flickered down to her, then back to Daniel. "No," he said slowly. "I came for answers." Emma frowned. "Answers?" The billionaire exhaled, his jaw tightening as if bracing himself for something. He turned the doll in his hands, fingers brushing over the tiny hidden locket sewn into the dress. With careful precision, he undid the delicate stitching, revealing a tiny silver heart no larger than a fingernail. He held it up to the dim light. "Where did this come from?" Emma blinked, confused. "It's always been there. It was my mama's doll before it was mine." At that, Alexander went completely still. His breathing slowed, his grip on the locket tightening ever so slightly. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, his face lined with exhaustion. "You already know who she was, don't you?" Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. Emma's gaze bounced between them. "What are you talking about?" Alexander inhaled sharply. "Your mother," he said, his voice controlled but heavy with something Emma couldn't place. "What was her name?" "Elena," she answered automatically, her brow furrowing. "Elena Parker." Alexander's throat tightened at the name, his fingers closing around the tiny locket like it was a lifeline. Elena. The woman he had loved. The woman he had lost. The woman he had never stopped searching for. A heavy silence filled the small apartment, pressing down on them like an invisible weight. The dim flickering light above cast long shadows across the peeling wallpaper, stretching toward Alexander as if the past itself was reaching for him. His grip on the locket tightened, the tiny silver heart still warm from Emma's touch. Daniel's tired eyes met his, and in them, Alexander saw something that made his stomach twist: recognition, regret, and something unspoken. It was confirmation of what he already knew deep inside but had never dared to voice. Elena Parker. He had spent years searching, chasing ghosts through forgotten addresses and dead-end trails, always arriving too late. He had built an empire on the ruins of his grief, convincing himself that wealth and power would somehow make up for the emptiness she left behind. But she had been here all along, living a life he had never been part of. And now, she was gone. Emma shifted beside him, her small hands clenched at her sides. "Mister, why are you asking about my mama?" Her voice was cautious, her eyes searching his face for answers he wasn't sure he was ready to give. Alexander forced himself to breathe, to steady the storm brewing inside him. He crouched down so that he was at eye level with her. His usually sharp gaze softened in a way it never had before. "Because she meant something to me," he admitted. "A long time ago." Emma studied him, her young face lined with an intensity that didn't belong to a child. "Did you love her?" The question hit him harder than he expected. Love. The word felt foreign on his tongue after all these years, buried under contracts, business deals, and a life spent chasing everything except what truly mattered. He swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, I did." Emma's lips parted slightly, and for the first time, Alexander saw it, Elena's eyes, staring back at him from her daughter's face. Daniel exhaled heavily, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Then you should know." He hesitated, glancing at Emma before turning back to Alexander. "She never stopped loving you either." A sharp pang of pain twisted in his chest. He had convinced himself over the years that she had moved on, that she had left him behind as he had risen to the top of the corporate world. But now, hearing those words, knowing she had still carried him in her heart even as she built a life without him, It made his carefully constructed walls crack. Emma's small voice broke through his thoughts. "Mister, why did you come here?" He looked at her then, really looked at her. This child, this tiny girl who had sold the only thing she had left of her mother to save her father. A child with Elena's eyes and her unshakable spirit. He had spent his life accumulating everything. Wealth, power, status. But standing here, in this cramped apartment, surrounded by the echoes of a woman he had lost, he realized how little any of it meant. "I came because I can help," he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. Emma's brow furrowed. "Help." Daniel coughed weakly, shaking his head. "We don't need." "Yes, you do," Alexander interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And I won't stand here and watch you refuse it." Emma's lips pressed together, her small hands balling into fists. "I didn't sell my doll for charity," she said, her voice trembling with stubborn pride. "I just wanted to help my papa." Something in Alexander's chest tightened. This girl, so young, so small, carrying the weight of an entire world on her tiny shoulders. He saw Elena in every inch of her, in the way she stood her ground, in the way she was willing to sacrifice everything for the people she loved. "It's not charity," he said softly. "It's family." Emma blinked. "Family." Alexander exhaled. "Your mother. She was everything to me. And whether you knew it or not, that makes you part of my family too." Daniel's jaw tensed. "And what exactly do you want from us?" Alexander didn't hesitate. "A chance to do what I should have done years ago." Emma's gaze flickered to her father, uncertainty written across her face. Daniel's voice was hoarse. "And what is that, Carter?" Alexander stood up, slipping the tiny silver locket into Emma's small hand and closing her fingers around it. His voice was steady when he spoke. "To take care of what Elena left behind." Emma's fingers tightened around the locket, her eyes searching his, looking for some hidden deception, some trick. But there was none. Just truth. Just a man who had spent his life chasing the wrong things, finally standing in front of the one thing that had truly ever mattered. A life he had the power to change. And this time, he wouldn't walk away.